Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
This one's about a family who moved into an old, decrepit house on the outskirts of a small town. It was the kind of house that was barely on the radar, a place most people had forgotten about. Its once vibrant paint now chipped, its windows covered in layers of dust. But the price was right. The Simmons family, looking for a fresh start after some tough years, thought they'd found their perfect home. The first few weeks were typical. They unpacked, set up their lives, and adjusted to the strange noises that came with an old house. The creaking floorboards, the groans of the foundation settling, and the occasional breeze that made the house shudder in ways that could be explained away. But it wasn't long before things started happening. It started small, odd shadows in the corner of their eyes, whispers that drifted through the house when no one was around. At night, the air would grow unusually cold in certain rooms, even though the heat was working perfectly fine. But the most unnerving thing was the attic. The door to it was old, heavy, and always stuck when they tried to open it. But sometimes, late at night, they could hear it creaking open on its own. The sound of something moving around up there, dragging across the floor, always followed by a low, guttural laugh. At first, they dismissed it as the house settling even further. But as the days wore on, things got worse. It wasn't just sounds anymore. Objects would move. A chair would be pulled out from the kitchen table in the morning, even though no one had been in the room the night before. A glass would be knocked over, the water pooling across the counter for no reason at all. One night, the youngest daughter, Emily, came rushing into her parents' room, eyes wide with fear. She had been playing with her dolls in her room, but something had startled her. She said she saw a figure standing in the doorway, a tall, thin man, wearing old clothes, his face obscured by shadows. The next day, her parents decided to finally go into the attic, convinced there was some logical explanation. Maybe a raccoon had gotten in, or there was a hidden passage somewhere that caused all the disturbances. When they finally managed to pry open the attic door, what they found sent chills down their spines. The room was empty, except for an old, rotting rocking chair sitting in the center. The wooden floorboards were stained with something dark, almost black, and there were faint scratched marks on the walls, as if something had been scraping against them. The air felt thick, like it was harder to breathe. And that laugh, the same low, unsettling laugh they had heard at night, echoed through the attic. It wasn't a real laugh. It was mechanical, hollow, like it had been recorded and played back on loop. The parents tried to leave the attic, but the door slammed shut behind them. Panicking, they tried to open it again, but it wouldn't budge. The shadows in the room grew darker, thickening like ink spilling across the floor. Emily's cries came from below, frantic, high-pitched, like she was calling for help. When they finally managed to break the door open, the house felt different. The air was colder, heavier. Emily was gone. They searched the house, but it was as if she had vanished. The rooms that had once been familiar were now disorienting, turning into impossible mazes with walls that didn't line up, doors that led into rooms that hadn't been there before. The smell of decay and mildew grew stronger the deeper they searched. But there were no signs of Emily, nothing. They called the police, but when the officers arrived, they found nothing. The house was still, the air warm again, the shadows back to their normal, harmless shapes. They searched for weeks, but it was as if the house had swallowed her whole. Years later, the Simmons family left the town, unable to cope with the loss. The house stood empty for years afterward, no one willing to buy it. People whispered about it, about the strange disappearances that had happened in the area over the years. The house had a reputation. It was a place where people went missing, and no one ever saw them again. The house is still there today, though the town has grown around it. People say if you go by late at night, you might see the lights flickering in the attic window. Sometimes they even hear that laugh. And if you listen closely enough, you might hear a voice calling from the darkness, asking you to come inside. Because in that house, the walls are hungry, and it's always waiting for the next person to disappear.
Story number 2.
There's an old story that's been passed down in the quiet town of Redwood Hills. They say, in the early 1900s, a man named Robert Ashford built a large mansion on the edge of the forest, far from town. Robert wasn't exactly well liked in the community. He was an eccentric, always reclusive, and had a reputation for being a little odd. He kept mostly to himself and hardly ever interacted with anyone. The mansion, known as Ashford Manor, became a legend in its own right, both for its size and for the strange things that surrounded it. It was said that Robert Ashford was obsessed with death. He kept a collection of oddities in his mansion: bones, old skulls, rare and expensive taxidermy, and strange artifacts from other cultures. No one really knew what drove him to this obsession, but locals believed he had somehow learned the dark arts, some ancient rituals that could bring the dead back to life. But one evening, as the story goes, something went terribly wrong. A group of local kids, curious and daring, decided to sneak into the mansion one stormy night. They'd heard the rumors. Strange lights flickered in the windows at night. Odd sounds echoed from the walls, and every so often they could swear they saw shadows moving across the windows. They wanted to see if it was true. They wanted to uncover the mystery themselves. The group managed to get inside through a broken window. The house was covered in dust, its walls cracked and peeling, but it still had an eerie presence. The floors groaned under their feet as they moved cautiously from room to room, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They joked nervously, trying to calm their nerves, but the air was thick with the feeling that something was wrong. They found a large study, filled with books and strange instruments that none of them could recognize. The air was heavier in here, colder. One of the kids, Tom, opened a large, ancient-looking book he found on a desk. As soon as he flipped it open, the room grew colder and the lights flickered. A low, guttural growl echoed from somewhere in the house, deep and distant. The group froze, looking around nervously. Suddenly, they heard the sound of footsteps coming from above them. Slow, deliberate, heavy, as if something or someone was moving across the floor of the upper level, the floorboards creaking under its weight. The kids went quiet, straining their ears. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then continued, as if it was moving closer. The chill in the air deepened. Panic set in. The kids turned to leave, but the house seemed to shift. The hallway they had just come from was gone. The walls seemed to close in. The stairs that led to the exit had vanished. They were trapped. That's when they saw him. Robert Ashford stood at the end of the hallway, his face pale and gaunt, his clothes tattered and stained. His eyes were wide and unfocused, as if he didn't really see them. But the worst part? His skin was stretched too tightly over his bones, his lips pulled back into a smile that wasn't quite human. It was as if his very presence was draining the life out of the room. He didn't speak, just stood there, swaying slightly, as though he were waiting. The kids ran, their footsteps echoing through the empty house. They could hear Robert's heavy, uneven breathing behind them, each step louder, faster. The house twisted around them, every door leading to a different part of the house, no matter which way they turned. It felt as if the very walls were alive, suffocating them with its malevolent presence. Every room they entered seemed to grow darker, the air growing colder and heavier. They eventually found their way to the front door, but it wouldn't open. It was as if the house itself was holding them inside. The pounding of Robert's footsteps grew louder, more frantic, like he was closing in on them from every direction. Then, as they tried to force open the door, they heard a whisper from behind them. "You should never have come here." And that was the last thing they ever heard. The next morning, the townspeople found the mansion empty. No sign of the children, no broken windows, no sign of forced entry. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Robert Ashford was never seen again either, though there were rumors that his ghost wandered the house, still seeking something, still trying to complete some unfinished ritual. Some say Ashford Manor still stands today, hidden deep in the woods, though it's now just a shell of its former self, decaying, forgotten by time. Those who venture too close to the ruins at night sometimes hear the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the trees. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear a whisper on the wind, warning you shouldn't have come here. Those who've dared to go inside have never returned.
Story number 3.
In the small, unassuming town of Graywood, there was a strange legend that surrounded the old abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. It had been closed for decades after a fire ravaged part of the building, leaving it in ruins. The fire had taken many lives, including several patients who had been trapped in their rooms, unable to escape the smoke and flames. The town had never fully recovered from the tragedy, and the hospital was left to rot, forgotten by most. But there were some things that never truly stay forgotten. A young man named Chris, an aspiring journalist new to town, heard about the hospital's tragic history and decided it would make a perfect subject for a piece. He was determined to uncover the truth behind the fire, the patients, and the eerie tales that locals whispered about the place. Despite everyone's warnings, Chris took it upon himself to explore the abandoned hospital one foggy evening. As he approached the building, the air seemed to grow colder, even though it wasn't particularly chilly outside. The hospital loomed before him, a hulking mass of decaying brick and shattered glass. The windows were boarded up, and the door had long since fallen off its hinges. But Chris was undeterred. He stepped inside, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, and he immediately felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The silence in the building was deafening. The air smelled of mildew and something sharper, something that reminded him of burnt wood and decay. Chris explored the first few floors, his footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. The hospital had once been a place of healing, but now it was a haunting shell of its former self. The walls were peeling, the floors warped, and the air was thick with the remnants of something that had long passed. He took pictures, jotted down notes, and moved deeper into the building, curious to uncover more. But it wasn't long before the temperature began to drop even further, and Chris started hearing things, whispers, soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Help us!" He stopped dead in his tracks, his heart racing. The voice was faint, almost drowned out by the heavy silence, but it was clear enough to send a chill down his spine. He called out, asking if anyone was there, but no answer came. A low moan echoed from somewhere deeper in the hospital. Chris's pulse quickened, but he pushed forward, drawn by something he couldn't explain. It wasn't until he reached the old emergency room that things truly began to unravel. The door to the room was partially ajar, and the air inside was colder still. As Chris pushed it open, the unmistakable smell of burnt flesh filled his nostrils. He gagged, recoiling. But the smell wasn't the worst part. It was the room itself. The floor was covered in old, charred stains, and the walls bore scorch marks, remnants of the fire that had claimed the lives of so many. But what chilled him to his core were the shapes. At first, he thought they were shadows, but as his flashlight swept over them, he realized they were human shapes, pale, ghostly figures standing motionless against the walls. They were dressed in hospital gowns, their faces pale and twisted in expressions of pain and fear, their eyes hollow as though they had never truly left this place. Some were burned beyond recognition, their skin cracked and blackened, and then they moved. Slowly they shifted toward Chris, their movements jerky and unnatural, their hollow eyes fixed on him as they started to whisper again, louder this time. "Help us!" The air turned frigid, and Chris's breath turned to mist. His legs trembled, his body frozen in place as he watched the figures get closer, their feet dragging across the floor in slow, dragging steps. It was as if they were trapped in an endless loop, bound to the hospital, unable to escape their torment. Chris turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind him. His flashlight flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling as he tried to turn on the flashlight, but it too refused to cooperate. The whispers grew louder, and now there was a sound of something scratching, dragging along the floor, something coming closer. He could feel their presence all around him. It was suffocating. With his heart pounding, Chris finally managed to pry open the door and stumble out into the hallway. He ran as fast as he could, but it felt like the walls themselves were closing in on him. He couldn't get away fast enough. The whispers followed him, growing louder and more frantic, as if the spirits were closing in on him, trying to drag him back to where they were. Just as he reached the entrance, he felt a cold hand brush his shoulder, the touch icy and unnatural. He whirled around, but there was nothing there, nothing except the faint outline of a figure in the doorway, watching him. Chris bolted from the building, the door slamming shut behind him, and he didn't stop running until he was clear of the hospital grounds. The next morning, he tried to shake off what had happened, convincing himself that it was just his imagination. But when he went through the photos on his camera, something made his blood run cold. In the background of one of the photos, the one taken in the emergency room, there was a figure standing behind him. The face was obscured in shadow, but the twisted shape of a burned, ghostly hand was reaching out toward him, hovering just inches from his back. That evening, Chris left town and never returned to Graywood, but the hospital still stands, its broken windows staring out across the foggy landscape. And sometimes, if you pass by at night, you might hear the faint sound of whispers drifting from inside. Help, us. And those who listen too closely never come back.
Story number 4.
In the remote hills of Tennessee, there was an old, abandoned church that locals had long since avoided. The church, known as St. Andrew's Chapel, had been built over a century ago, and for many years, it had been a place of worship and community gatherings. But a series of strange events led to its abandonment in the 1930s, and it was left to decay, a shadow of its former self. No one really knew what had happened, but there were rumors, whispers of dark rituals and mysterious disappearances. Some said the church had been cursed from the beginning, built on the site of a pagan burial ground. Others claimed that it had been the location of a secret society, performing rituals to summon something far darker than anyone had imagined. No one knew for sure, but one thing was clear. After the church was abandoned, people began to vanish. It started with a group of teenagers in the 1950s. They were daring, searching for a thrill on a summer night, and the church was an easy target for their curiosity. They entered the church after dusk, planning to spend the night there, joking about the stories they'd heard. They made a pact to stay in the old chapel until morning, but by dawn, only one of them had returned. The girl, Molly, was found wandering in the woods near the church, her clothes torn, her hair matted with dirt. She couldn't remember anything that had happened. She was found crying, incoherent, her eyes wild, as if she had seen something that had broken her mind. The police couldn't get any answers from her, and eventually she was sent away to an asylum, where she spent the rest of her life speaking only in cryptic phrases, some of which were, "They're still there," and "The Dark One waits." The other 4 teens were never found. Years passed, and the stories surrounding the church grew more disturbing. People in the nearby town began reporting strange figures seen near the church late at night. Some described shadows moving unnaturally fast. Others spoke of hearing whispers carried on the wind, whispers that sounded like names or perhaps chants. No one dared to venture near St. Andrew's Chapel after sunset. Then in the 1970s, a group of amateur ghost hunters came to investigate the church. They were equipped with cameras, EVP recorders, and all the tools of the trade, eager to capture proof of the supernatural. But after entering the chapel, they never returned. The only thing left behind was their equipment, still running, still recording. The footage was discovered weeks later. The tape showed the investigators walking through the church, laughing and joking nervously. But as they explored deeper into the chapel, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the lights on their cameras flickered. They began hearing footsteps in the background, and a soft chanting sound, like a language that no one recognized, echoed from the dark corners of the building. Then the footage became erratic. One by one, the investigators began to panic. They looked around frantically, as if something was watching them. At one point, the camera tilted and captured a dark figure standing at the altar. Tall, impossibly thin, its form shifting like it was made of smoke or shadows. The figure's face was obscured, but the thing had an eerie presence that filled the screen. The last frame was a blur, jostling, running footsteps. Then, silence. The camera fell to the ground, recording only static. When the footage was analyzed, the investigators' voices could still be heard faintly in the background. But what was most chilling was the voice that joined them. The deep, distorted voice that didn't belong to anyone present. It whispered just before the footage cut out, "You shouldn't have come." The church remains there to this day, hidden deep within the woods, its silhouette rising against the twilight sky. The townsfolk say it's best to stay away, for those who get too close are never seen again. On certain nights when the fog is thick and the air is still, some say you can hear the whispers, voices calling out from the chapel, pleading for help, begging for someone to come inside. But those who have ventured near report seeing shadows, figures, moving in the windows, and a sense of darkness so oppressive it seems to press down on your chest. The last time anyone entered the church and came back was a man named Ethan. He was a local, known for being brave or foolish, depending on who you asked. He went into the church one cold winter evening, armed only with a flashlight and his skepticism. When he returned the next morning, his face was pale, his eyes hollow, and he was muttering to himself, repeating the same words over and over. I heard it. I heard it. Coming for me. He was found walking in circles in the woods near the church, his flashlight abandoned in the snow. When asked what had happened, he simply said, "It's waiting. It's still waiting." The town believes the church is a place of darkness where something ancient and malevolent resides. And no matter how many people try to uncover the truth, the Dark One, as they call it, waits, hidden, watching, until the next soul dares to set foot inside.